Now, the product life cycle theory has been widely used and was actually is not anymore the sort of like most used approach nowadays, but it was pretty successful because it was supported by several empirical findings that were reported by OECD, that I remind you is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and which is basically, if you want, the international organization that groups the most advanced countries in the world in terms of the richest countries in the world. This organization made a report in the 1970 with several empirical results that were kind of supportive for the predictions that you can make using Vernon's approach. In particular, this report was showing that many innovations across several different products and across several different industries, you observe that many innovations tend to originate mainly in the U.S. At the time, in particular, many innovations tended to originate mainly in the US, and just later on they were spreading to Western Europe, which is highly consistent with the idea of production being located in the US during the invention phase, and then moving to other countries during other stages of the product life cycle. Secondly, the main mechanisms of spread of technological innovation, and this again was true up until the 1970s, was direct production by US companies in Europe via foreign direct investments. So at that time, most of the technological knowledge was moving from the US to company through foreign direct investments that were undertaken by US companies in Europe. So the idea is that basically that when the US company during the last part of the maturity phase, or during the last part of the production phase, or the early beginning of the maturity phase, when during this period the US company were moving production into Europe via foreign direct investments, they were also moving some sort of technological knowledge that was needed to produce this product, okay, that before was not there in the receiving countries. So in this sense, that is also the reason why during that period there was also a lot of attention paid on foreign direct investments as driver of technological knowledge, as tools that you could use to transfer technological knowledge from one country to the other. And finally, the prediction by Vernon was also verified by the fact that you observed US being the leader, in particular in what at that time were considered as the new sectors, such as nuclear power and computer. And on the contrary, the position of the US was relatively less strong in terms of leadership in relatively mature sectors such as textile, okay? Which again is consistent with the fact that US tend to produce so that production that is located in the US tend to be focused on more innovative productions, which implies also that new sectors in which products are more new tends to be more concentrated in the US, and therefore US tend to be the leader in these sectors. Where on the contrary, sectors that are characterized by more mature production, such as textile, in which there is little innovation going on, the characteristics of the product are almost fixed for a long time, in these sectors, the production in the US is relatively less relevant, less important, and therefore also the leadership of the US in this sector tend to be weak. Okay, and on the contrary, in these sectors, countries that are more competitive in terms of production costs, in particular on labor costs, such as China, for instance, for some part also Italy, are more relevant. So these countries are more likely to be the leader. Okay, so now this is basically it for the product life cycle. So once again, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of this theory? The advantages, compared in particular to Himmer approach, if you want, is that this is a purely dynamic theory. Okay, so changes in the characteristics of the firm, the characteristics of the market and the industry, and the interaction of these changes over time are an intrinsic component of the model. So it is important. So this dynamic aspect plays an important role in explaining how production moves across country. Secondly, as I was saying before, the product life cycle blends in an interesting way both demand-based factors and supply-based factors, so characteristics of the market, large, small, rich consumers, poor consumers, and characteristics of the supply, availability of unskilled or skilled labor. Third, there is an important role of innovation and technology in the argument, in particular, the way in which innovation and technology spread over time, and in particular spread across countries, is not taken as given, but is an endogenous component of the model, because it depends on how firms adjust their production activities depending on the phases of the product life cycle. And this is also an important aspect of the theory, which is oftentimes not taken into consideration. Other advantages are that, which is okay, similar to what I was saying before, there is an interplay between consumers, producers, and market structures. There is okay, so there is there is a role played by competition and conflicts between rival firms, because all the story is about how firms create competitive advantages depending on the phases of the product life cycle in which you are. Although compared to this, for instance, to Himmer approach and to other approaches that we will see in the future classes, this competition story, these conflicts among rival firms, is mainly in terms of firms that are competing at the same, let's say, stage of the value chain. There is instead much less the role of conflicts between subsidiaries or suppliers with respect to final firms. Okay, but still, the competition plays an important role, and this is again an advantage. And finally, this theory can also link in a nice way the relationship between FDI and trade, which is also an interesting aspect of the theory. So I was saying, on the basis of this theory, you can not only make sense of the patterns of foreign direct investments, but you can also derive some predictions that can be tested on the data with respect to the patterns of international trade, which is also some nice characteristics of the theory.